a sigh of relief. A peace deal brokered between Israel and UAE. When Israel was planted in 1948 in that place, there was a war between Israel and Arab countries wherein Israel won that war. And in 1967, again, there was a war between Israel and Arab countries. Again, Israel defeated Arab countries. Always Israel has been a thorn in the flesh at that place, and it was a conflict point where the world was always on its toes. What might happen at that place? All the time, world was watching that particular place. However, a new era has begun. Israel and UAE has brokered a peace deal now. So what is the way forward? And why this deal occurred at this point of time? So what is the way forward? Again, I hope that Iran also joins this. It is highly doubtful whether Iran would join or not, because Iran is arch rival to Israel. Iran is enemy to Israel at this point of time. Iran doesn't acknowledge the existence of Israel at this point of time. However, I hope that things will normalize as it happened between Israel and UAE, and Iran also starts recognizing Israel. Friends, why this event has occurred? I look at this event as a watershed moment in the history, because after UAE, I'm seeing that Saudi Arabia will also follow the suit, and other Arab countries will also follow the suit, and it is very much important. And friends, if you look at it, why this occurred? This occurred because I believe that it is because of the corona pandemic. Corona pandemic wrecked all the countries, wrecked economies of all the countries, and no country is exception at this point of time. And it really indeed has affected Arab countries more. If you look at UAE's predominant income is from tourism, and some part it comes from hydrocarbons. And if you look at Saudi Arabia's income, Saudi Arabia's predominant income is from hydrocarbons. But with advent of shale oil from United States and with price fluctuations of the oil, so Saudi Arabia is vulnerable at this point of time. And same goes with UAE. And they cannot afford an enemy beside them to fight. So that is the reason I think that UAE has come forward and shook hands with Israel at this point of time. And I'm seeing that Saudi Arabia would soon come forward and shake hands with Israel. That is a good thing. However, if you look at the history, Israel was planted. And it was always a wound in the Middle Eastern place, and where all countries are hell-bent against the Israel, and Israel survived. So what had happened we cannot change, but what can happen we can change. And that is the approach that really UAE and Arab countries have taken at this point of time. And I hope other countries like Iran, Turkey, other Arab countries will also take this into consideration. When it comes to Indian subcontinent, Pakistan was planted in 1947, and there were many wars for territories. There were many wars after that. 1947 there was war. So it has been happening like that. And friends, what had happened had happened. We cannot change that. I hope sense prevails in Pakistani establishment. I'm talking about the army establishment, because the whole civilian government is under the army at this point of time. So army wakes up, and army looks at India as a partner, not as an enemy. So when this sense prevails, we can also see peace in India. So I hope that sense prevails, because we are spending so much of money in nuclear weapons, we are spending so much money in other ammunitions. So that could be used for betterment of betterment of Indian subcontinent, because there is so much of poverty in Pakistan, there is so much of poverty in India. We can indeed take this whole process to the next level if we forget the past and if we choose peace for the future. Thank you so much, and more power to you.